I want to welcome you back to our study in the book of Galatians. Today we're looking at Galatians, the third chapter, verse number 17. So we're looking again at the Apostle Paul's teaching on the law and on faith, or faith and the promise. And so it's very important that a believer understands the relationship between the law and faith. We need to make sure that we don't just say, well, we're going to just follow the law and be right with God, because that's an impossibility. But we also need to make sure that we don't say, well, I'm going to just do away with the law. I don't have to listen to the law anymore. I don't have to follow the law anymore. I can just do what I want. You know what? That's not going to get you very far in your Christian life. So what does the Apostle Paul say? And again, we're in Galatians, the third chapter, verse number 17. And it says, what I am saying is this. So the Apostle Paul opens with a phrase. He's saying, guys, you need to listen to me. I'm saying something that's very important to you. I'm saying something that you need to know. Now, the Galatians were in a struggle. They were in a struggle that the Judaizers were saying, okay, you come to Jesus, now you need to act like a Jewish person. But then they were also in a struggle with a teaching that was saying you can just do whatever you want. And so we need to understand that the importance that Paul is stressing here is to stay in the principles that God has laid out in his word. And so he starts right out in verse number 17, and he says, what I am saying, in other words, I'm making this clear. In fact, he's taken almost 3 chapters to make it clear to the Galatians. But he's saying, what I am saying is this. Number 1, the law, which came 430 years later, does not invalidate a covenant previously ratified by God, so as to nullify the promise. What's the Apostle Paul saying? He's saying when the law came, it came 430 years after God has given the promise to Abraham. You see, there's a 430-year span between when God speaks to Abraham and gives him the promise and the covenant, until God comes and gives to the children of Israel through Moses the 10 Commandments and the law. Now notice what Paul says here. It says the law does not invalidate the covenant ratified by God. The law didn't come and make the covenant that God had made with Abraham and with his seed, which is Jesus. The law didn't come and say, well, you know what? That covenant's no longer valid. First of all, we need to understand that when God makes a covenant, the covenant it's set in stone. God will not lie. What God has promised, he's going to bring it to pass. And so the law, when the law came, it didn't come to invalidate or make the covenant useless. So we understand that the covenant that was previously ratified, and this word ratified actually means to be signed or to put into action, that this covenant has been put into action. It was put into action 430 years before the law came. And then the Apostle Paul says at the end of verse number 17, so as to nullify the promise. What's he saying? The law didn't come and then nullify the promise, to make the promise of no effect. You see, we need to understand that what God promised Abraham, and his seed. We talked about that last week. That seed is Jesus. What God promised Abraham and Jesus is still good today. The law cannot invalidate it. It can't cause that covenant to be broken. The law can't come and nullify the promise. It can't come and take away the promise that God gave to Abraham, which is a promise of blessing. We need to understand that the law cannot do that. But now let's go on into verse number 18. For if the inheritance is based on the law, now we're talking about the inheritance which comes from the promise. The inheritance, for if the inheritance is based on the law, it is no longer based on a promise. You see, our inheritance is not based on the law. Our inheritance in Christ is based upon the promise that God made to Abraham first and to his seed, Jesus. We need to understand that our inheritance, the things that we receive because we are in Christ, which is righteousness, which is a whole lot of things that we don't have the time to really go into. But our inheritance is not based upon the law, but it's based on a promise. Now, the apostle goes on in verse number 18, but God has granted it to Abraham by means of a promise. How do you receive the inheritance that God's given you? Do you receive it by being good? No. You receive the inheritance that God has given to you by believing, by putting your faith in what God has promised. You receive the inheritance not by the keeping of the law, but you receive the inheritance by means. It was given to us. It's given to us because God promised it. Now, that doesn't take away the importance of the law, and we're going to talk about the law again tomorrow. I hope that you join us as we continue our study in this book of Galatians. Thank you for watching us.